Hi, everybody. Good evening. Jack O'Malley here with you with our Monday update that's actually being recorded earlier. That was because our guest tonight, Representative Ann Bollin, is available now. So you're watching it on Monday, but we've recorded it earlier. And of course, Ann is a colleague of mine in the House of Representatives. She is from the 42nd District, and that's Livingston County. And she is a former, in her past life, she is a former clerk. And she is now the chairman of our elections committee. And Ann, welcome. Thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you very much, Jack. Good to be with you on the famous Jack O'Malley podcast.
Yeah, I don't know how, maybe infamous, maybe. I don't know. But, and as I said, this is very informal. And I think that's one of the things that has, resonated with people is I just talk and I just try to explain it to them in plain language. So I'd like to do that. And I know you're a plain speaker too. So I'm not going to go into all of the history of where we're at with elections because everybody knows what the concerns are. So let's move forward. I know you've told me, this was even before the election, you got into this game as a state rep because you wanted to make changes in our election process, correct?
That's true. In part, I absolutely did. I came from local government as a local clerk, and so there were a lot of things that I think that are really beneficial if we run them at the local level. And clerking and election administration is one of them. And certainly the goal always is for every clerk, and I believe that we have a lot of really outstanding clerks in the state, is to make sure that every eligible voter can vote freely, secretly, independently, safely, and securly. And so, I don't think that's changed.
No, I don't. And I agree with you. And, the funny thing is, Ann, is for my many years in the media, how many elections did we have that happened where there was lackluster turnout? People didn't know what was on the ballot. My point is that for so many decades, elections kind of came and went, and we got complacent. Now, all of a sudden, eyeballs are back on elections. And I think rightfully so, and that's good. I'm not complaining. I'm just kind of trying to show the history. And one of the things I think it was you said to me, but I won't quote you because I can't say it. There's a lot of things that happen in elections that the average person just doesn't understand because it's a different ball game. There are certain different terms used, different things happen where somebody might see something that is taking place. And well, why is that? There was one thing, and I'll be specific, is there was a question with envelopes this year. The ballots were being returned in different envelopes, and it partly was because they went to a new envelope, but they were allowed to use up the old envelopes, right?
Correct. So when those things happen, I mean, it's a change. Those are changes for the local clerk, but they're also a change for the voter. So in 2020, the envelope format was changed. And as you mentioned, clerks were allowed to use up their old stock. So first of all, when the voter got it, and then all the skepticism or misinformation around the election, people weren't looking for the old large brown envelope necessarily, or that could be the case, that's what they were looking for. So it came in a different format. And just there was a lot of news media, a lot of attention on the election, and, it raised a lot of red flags and just concerns for people. But our clerks stood ready, over 1,600 of them locally, to try and reassure the voters that, yes, these were legitimate envelopes. I am the only one that is able to issue a ballot, and the receipt of the envelope and the ballot is at the local clerk's office. And ultimately, that's where they all get deposited, and then the ballots are counted from there.
So let's get into maybe some specifics of where you want to take your committee. And the mail-in ballot. Now, I'm going to be honest, a lot of people who are watching this knew about it, but I've heard from a lot of people who were, why did Secretary Benson just mail out all these ballots? That's not right. 2 years ago, we voted that in, the state of Michigan. That no excuse absentee is now law, correct?
Correct. It's a constitutional amendment. And again, there was confusion. What the Secretary of State did was she did a mass mailing of absent voter applications, not ballots. The local clerk administers and sends the ballots out. That's who is responsible for ballot delivery to the voter, not the Secretary of State. And so there was a lot of confusion. With Proposal 3 in 2018, It also called for same-day registration, no reason AV, and post-election audits, and a number of other things. This was our first large statewide election with no reason AV. It was a presidential year, and then we also had a pandemic. And so all of these, I think, are somewhat anomalies. And so certainly there was a, crushing increase of absent voter ballots. But all ballots were issued because there was a receipt of an application.
So where do we go from here with your committee? Are you going to look into that? What changes might you foresee coming through by way of legislation and that sort of thing? Because one of the things that I hear is I want to know my vote counts, and I'm concerned because Uncle Charlie has been dead for 10 years and he got a ballot. There, even with the qualified and non-qualified voter rolls, is there a way we can clean that up? How do we make sure that Uncle Charlie, who's been dead, doesn't get to vote?
Well, what we want to make sure, number one thing is we have to have clean voter rolls, right? And the voter rolls are generally the responsibility of the local clerk, and you need to be maintaining those regularly. The Secretary of State and the county clerk also have a role in that, and that making sure when they get notification from the Secretary of State or by death records that information is getting communicated to the local clerk to be able to take and basically cancel the registration of that voter. But Michigan election law and the National Voter Registration Act calls, there's some pretty strict standards because we want to err on the side of making sure that we don't disenfranchise voters, and we only want eligible and legitimate voters on the rolls, right? So the update has to come. It needs to be regular. As a result of the mass mailing of absent voter applications by the Secretary of State, some things are taking place. The Secretary of State issued yesterday a notice that they are taking anybody that is on what we call the cancellation countdown and sending them a notice, and then also working with the local clerks to return those returned absent voter applications to allow the local clerks to work through those and make sure that we are canceling voters that are no longer here, that we have record of moving, and send notice to them perhaps that they are on a cancellation countdown versus absolute cancellation. So a very aggressive effort is being made. I am hopeful that it's going to update our voter rolls to where they need to be, and then it'll be a matter of continuing that practice to make sure that we have an updated at all times voter registration list.
So when you get your committee together, are there certain areas that you as chair want to bring people in and investigate and find out and clarify and clean up?
Yes, absolutely. So the voter registration rolls. So this is a new activity that's kind of part and parcel to what has happened to date. And the Secretary of State, definitely I'm sure that the Secretary will come in. I'd like to have local clerks and county clerks come in and talk about the voter rolls, how we update them. There's been a question about access to the qualified voter file and whether or not when, for example, the death notices come in or the death certificates, and can county clerks go in and make that adjustment and cancel those voters. So we're going to definitely take a deep dive into that. Some of the other things I want to start the year off with, some of the proposals that didn't get over the finish line that I think are critical to elections moving forward. We're going to start out with some issues that came up through an Auditor General's inquiry or review of the Secretary of State's voter rolls, and we had some bills that made it all the way to the floor. They just didn't get to the governor for signature this last term. I had a couple of bills in that would be put more tools in the toolbox for our local clerks. Having come from the clerk community, they were things that we have really advocated for a long time, and that would be having a requirement that communities with over 2 precincts, more than 6,000 registered voters, are required to have absent voter counting boards. There's been a lot of skepticism over the absent voter counting boards, but having been a former clerk, and I think for the purposes of transparency, accountability, continuity, conformity, and audit purposes, that I think it adds to the integrity of the secrecy of the ballot, and I'd like to see it uniform across the state that we have absent voter counting boards. I think that just helps with the administration and, again, preserving the secrecy, and also allows us to have timely returns, if you will. So standardizing some of those, looking at precinct consolidation in smaller turnout elections that will help us save, limited resources. So those are some of the efforts. We are going to take some of the concerns that were raised in testimony to the Oversight Committee, and we're going to take a look at them. And then there are a number of things, I wore a different lens this election cycle, right, as a legislator and outside of running an election, that I'd like to see cleaned up as well, and clarified. I think that there is a need to review what the certification process is, what the Board of Canvassers' role is, the State Board of Canvassers, and see if we can't do better with that. The number one goal of this is to restore the public's trust in government and voters' confidence, and even candidates' confidence in the system and in the process.
Sure. So you just brought up something that I remember scratching my head, and maybe there's a nuance to it that I don't understand and I get, but we couldn't recount or audit an election until after it was certified. That seemed kind of bass-backwards to me. I would think you'd be able to audit and do those sort of things before you certify an election.
Well, that was one of the, kind of a residual consequence, if you will, of Proposal 3. So Proposal 3 called for post-election audits, but it really doesn't set up for a framework if there is this question. And the post-election audits take place after the certification of the election, right? And so now we had this circumstance with the 2020 election. And, sometimes I like to look at these problem areas, these irregularities, these opportunities. How do we frame it so that it does work in what the intent was? So, and I'm going to be taking a good look at that, getting information, inviting people in, certainly to, one, listen to what the problems or the perception was from people on all sides of it, and then how we might move forward. But I do think that we need to look at just establish some sort of a framework for this, right? Because what we heard was it's after the certification process, it's more an administrative exercise. And then there's the recount process for an aggrieved candidate, but there was this gray area. So we need to evaluate that and figure out, how to address it.
Sure. And I'm going to ask a very broad question, but fraud. People are worried about it. And, one of the things that I hear is it said, well, there's a little bit of fraud or there's irregularities in every election. Well, we don't want any fraud. Irregularities are one thing, fraud is another. And I'm going to assume that if during your hearings you find out that, Snidely Whiplash over here did do something nefarious, you're going to signal it out and push for prosecution.
Absolutely. I think that when the laws are broken, we need to hold people accountable. All right. And I also, we're going to be taking up some ethics reform. And while it may not be illegal, I think that we want some assurance that local clerks, people involved with elections are, have some ethical code by which they're approaching their jobs. I always did. You're a clerk first, a candidate second. I'm going to be wearing, that I guess seated as a legislator, but, head of a clerk, a mom of millennials, a citizen, wearing a lot of different hats to look at really all sides of the matter, just to make sure that we can restore the public confidence, that we have secure and safe elections. And we have many checks and balances in Michigan election law. And one of the things that I found that really was significant to me, wearing a different lens this time around, is the fact that we had a lot of best practices. And maybe they weren't applied across the state consistently. And so evaluating for some of them that actually need to be put in statute so that there is a greater level of accountability and some action if they are not followed. That, in my opinion, is going to be the greatest contribution that we can give as legislatures to restore the confidence and assure voters, everybody, that our elections are being run fairly.
And just another, and we're getting long here. I don't want to go too much longer, but one of the things I heard from my clerks when I said, what happened, is we probably need to put more money into training for our election day people. I hear that can be a little bit skimpy. And then, the other big thing that came into discussion this term that I don't think ever really popped up before is the term poll watcher. You talk about ethics and rules, there's probably got to be a little focus on training and then those infamous poll watchers. Thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think training overall. All right. So we have poll watchers, we have challengers, we have election inspectors, we have voters, we have clerks, election administrators, right? Everybody plays a very important role in the process. All right. And we just need to make sure that each role understands what the rules and rights are of the other one and what there is a process for it. There should be really very little misunderstanding if everybody understands what each role is, and they're all important to the process to ensure that we have fair and free elections. And I was quite surprised, really some of the things that you take for granted, after you've been doing something for a long time, that you just kind of make part of your training, or things that you emphasize. But I would also say that elections are only held 3, maybe 4 times a year. All right. And so these refresher courses and the training requirements, I think that maybe we do have to increase them a little bit, make them a little more vigorous.
Yeah, well, I had heard someone who trained said they got, at least in this instance, they got trained a couple of weeks prior and it lasted an hour, hour and a half. And then they waited a couple of weeks and then there was election day, so it was game day, game on. And it was like, oh, what did I do? Or what did I learn? So yeah, training is always important. The other thing that I think is important, and get your maybe final thoughts, is the elector has the voter has a role in this too. And you mentioned ballot proposal 3. I've seen on many ballot proposals, people vote on them, but they don't really read the fine print. And so when these ballot proposals, like proposal 3, the no excuse absentee, I don't know if, and it won by a big margin. People probably didn't read the whole thing, and the devil's in the details. So we as voters need to make sure we read that stuff a little bit more in detail so that we know. So you are my guest. Final thoughts on elections and your new committee, and you've said a lot of great things. I know that no matter what you say here tonight, there's going to be in the comments, but what about this? 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 My point, I guess, is, folks, Ann's going to look at what about this, and this. We can't talk about it all tonight, but I'll let you wrap it up. Ann, what do you think?
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to all your listeners, too, and everybody. I am committed that we are going to restore the public's trust and confidence. I'm going to fight for fair and free elections. I'm going to listen. I'm going to be open to new ideas, listening to what the problems, but my goal is to move this state forward, restore the public's trust and confidence in government, in our elections, and instill that we have voter confidence, so that next time they vote, I want them assured that every eligible voter's vote will count.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ann is on the job. Don't worry. And thank you very much. Thank you for coming on. You got a big job ahead of you. I know you're going to get a lot of pushback. People aren't going to think you're doing enough. They're going to think you're doing too much. So just stay strong. We're behind you.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Folks, we're out of here for tonight. Keep praying for us. As I always say, pray for all your elected officials. And I got a feeling Ann and I will keep praying for you. Good night, everybody.